Okay, alrighty. Let's get down to it here. Wow. Okay, I have a Halloween hangover of sorts. Late night when you have kids who want to be out with their friends late. Okay, so getting my head in the game here. We're going to work through some more of the rise of Christianity today. Hopefully, get through most of it and have just a few slides left for Monday because Wednesday of next week is the second midterm. So, second midterm, right? You've got two big topics on it. One is secularization, and the other one is the rise of Christianity. And I was worried I was like super behind, and then I realized that actually, when I look back at my notes from last year, I'm exactly at the same pace as last year. And the second exam is all secularization and the rise of Christianity. So, I mean, again, it's going to be 5 short answer questions. So 2 for sure on secularization, 2 for sure on the rise of Christianity, and then 1 will be one or the other. Yeah, please. I thought when I looked at it, it said November 6th. I might have 2 dates on it because November 4th is Monday. Did I read that wrong? In which case, I'm in trouble. Super duper trouble. Hang on. Oops, wrong. Why is this taking me into the wrong? Oh, hang on a sec. I thought my syllabus said it was on the 6th, but I could be wrong. Let me go to my... Oh yeah, I do have it on the 4th, don't I? No! Then I am 1 class off pace. No, I have it there on the 4th. Unless I changed it on Canvas? Because I don't think I can change it in case people have conflict. That's the wrong thing. Oh, I'm having a day. I don't like the day after Halloween. Okay. For some reason, I thought it was on the 6th, and I might be mistaken. Nope, I have it set on the 4th. Okay, it is on the 4th. Curses. Is there any way that I can rejigger it so that it was on the 6th? If I just change the syllabus, will anyone know? Except the people in this room and everyone watching the recording. I'm just thinking if I could actually just, I think we could probably, okay. Here's what I'm going to say. Because we are 1 class behind, if anyone needs to, I will have it ready. It's ready to go. So I'm going to work on getting through all of the Rise of Christianity stuff today. If anyone needs to write it on the 1st, send me an email and I'll book it on the 4th. I need my brain to slow down and be faster at the same time. If anyone needs to write it on the 4th because it conflicts with other exams, let me know. And I'll send out an announcement to this effect. If not, I'm going to bump it to the 6th for everyone else. But if you, for some reason, need to write it on the 4th, we can do that. I can make that work for you. But otherwise, I'm going to bump it to the 6th for everyone else. And I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, so don't tell on me, and we'll all get along. But if you need to do it on the 4th, you can. If you need to do it on the 6th, you can. If you need an extension for some reason, just shoot me an email, and we'll work that out too. Thankfully, online exams are pretty easy. Okay, so I'm going to actually edit this and pretend like it never happened. I'll do that after class. I won't do it right away. Or will I? No, I'll do it after class. I don't want to waste time. Okay, but I will bump it and I'll just put an announcement on Canvas sometime today that we're going to do that. Because I honestly, in my head, it was next Wednesday. I don't know why it was on next Wednesday. And so I have not adjusted my pacing accordingly. So anyway, we can make everything work. Deep breath. Breathe in, breathe out. Let's talk. Oh yeah, please, sorry.
I just have a question again about the midterm two.
Yes.
Could you go over again what type of questions?
In terms of what? What do you mean about that?
You mentioned before, like 2 questions.
Oh, yeah, so there's 5 questions, right? So 5 questions, short answers, same format as last time. And I'll give you 65-ish minutes to do it. 2 of them for sure are going to be on secularization. Two for sure are going to be on the rise of Christianity. And then the 5th one will be a selection from either secularization or the rise of Christianity, right? So it's going to be a shuffle question. So on either. So if you recall, right, we have our 6 type, hang on, I'm just going to do one very quick thing here. I'm going to make myself a blank slide. Cancel. No, keep. I'm going to make myself a very quick blank slide so that I can talk about this more easily. I lost where I wanted to be. There we are. Okay. Just one blank slide and launch. Bless you. Okay, so what was I saying? Right, so you got your 5 questions, your 65-ish minutes, 2 on secularization, 2 on rise of Christianity, and 1 is a mix. So it's basically like a shuffle. It can be either rise of Christianity or secularization. Okay, we have our 6 types of secularization, right, which is inherited, late, so that's Steve Bruce, no secularization, that's Rodney Stark, neo-secularization, that's Mark Chavez, self-limiting secularization, which is Stark and Bainbridge, and then post-secularism, which is Habermas. Okay, so that is, and any questions on any of these are absolutely fair game. And when you're studying, something to think about for these is how do they relate to each other, right? So for instance, no secularization is trying to refute the inherited model and in some ways neo-secularization, right? Late secularization is going after Stark's no secularization and self-limiting secularization. So when you're thinking about these and you're studying, just think about how they relate to each other, right? Because all of this is a big conversation between sociologists of religion trying to figure out how secularization works and if it even exists, and they're all talking to each other and fighting each other's theories. So there are going to be questions that are like, hey, here's this, Stark's no secularization. What other model of secularization is he trying to refute when he makes this argument, right? So if he's talking myth of past piety, whose model of secularization is that arguing against, right? So does that make sense? Because all of this, right, it's like all a big conversation internally within sociology of religion where these theories are all talking to each other and in some sense kind of trying to refute each other. Okay. Hang on, I'm going to clear off my slide now if that works. So, rise of Christianity, right? So what do we have in the rise of Christianity? We have like basically conversion rates. We have interpersonal bonds. epidemics. We'll talk about women today. Very briefly, we'll talk about why Stark thinks the Jews were a significant source of conversions, and he's got a couple of really key theories on that. And one other thing, which is, very briefly, we'll talk about martyrs. Okay? So all of you can see, right, it's an exam with two kind of topics, but within those topics, right, there are these really big subtopics. So there's a lot of content here. Don't not study because you're like, oh, two things, secularization and the rise of Christianity. There's a lot of content within each of those. Okay. Other questions before I jump into me attempting to blast through? Okay, good God, no. Yes, first, second. Okay.
The only things, after the previous class, the only things that we have to generate our own examples for would be the macro, meso, and micro questions.
Correct. Yeah. Score, yes. It's just the neo-secularization stuff where you might have to think of your own examples, for sure. Okay. Oh, and now I feel so behind because I misjudged everything. Okay, so we ended off here, right? Talking last class about the skewed sex ratios in the Roman Empire, right? Way more males than females, and low social status for women, which probably allowed Christians to over-recruit women, and this will generate secondary conversions. Very simply, okay, and we know, right? We know this from historical evidence and from contemporary historians, that basically everybody took it as a given that Christianity was very appealing to women for whatever reason, right? Writers, both contemporary and historical, took it for granted that women found Christianity appealing. Okay, so we need to talk about two types of conversions that can happen. So the first one is primary conversion, and that's basically when you, as the convert, take an active role in your conversion, right? You become committed to a committed adherent based on your positive evaluation of the faith, attachment to people within it, and all of and all of those things, right? So you, for whatever reason, decide that you want to you investigate and you become a member of this faith. Now, secondary conversion is more passive and usually involves sort of the reluctant acceptance of a faith based on attachment to primary converts. So, in this case, oops, I am grouchy. Nothing is working today. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. I don't know why OBS acts weird on this laptop. Okay, the screen is weird. It went black. It went black for the breakdown. I'm sorry. Will there be practice questions posted? Yeah, I'll find a way. Okay. Okay, secondary converts. Oh, I'll show you the breakdown very quickly. Look, that's the breakdown, or half of it. The other half is gone. Okay. So, all of our sources, both ancient and modern, suggest that primary conversion is more common amongst women. That's very typical of new religious movements, right? And I talked about this last class. 3/4 of Christian Scientists, which is a kind of Christian sect, in the early days were women. Every new religious movement that we see, whether it be Mormonism or Nexium, right, the weird sex cult that was running out of Vancouver, we always see more women joining in the early days. And Stark sort of suggests, from historical patterns and things that we know about new religious movements and sects, we can sort of assume that probably about 2/3 of Christians were female in the first few centuries of Christianity. Again, very consistent with historical knowledge. Okay, so he then goes to this study, which is Gutentag and Secord, looking at the status of women compared to sex ratios, particularly in antiquity. And basically, what they theorize is that where males outnumber females, basically women, he says, are enclosed in repressive sex roles as men treat them as scarce goods. So weirdly, the fewer females that there are, the worse the treatment of women gets. Because generally speaking, they are, especially in the ancient world, they are scarce goods, right? And they're seen more as property. Now, when females outnumber males, the opposite happens. Women tend to have greater power and freedom. And the Guten Tag and Secord give the example of Athens and Sparta. So Athens and Sparta are two really weird ancient civilizations, right? We tend to think of Athens as the birthplace of democracy, which is sort of true and sort of isn't. But that's a story for a different course altogether, and certainly not when I'm rushing through to try and cover content for the midterm. Okay, so in the Athens versus Sparta example, Athens is a lot like Rome, right? You have lots of infanticide, you have abortion, infanticide, and all of these, things are actually seen as a good, right? There's lots of examples in Athenian philosophers where they say, yeah, if a child is sickly, it should be killed. If it's a girl, right, it's less valuable than a boy, and it's fine to, expose it to the elements and let it die, and all of these things. So Athens has a similar skewed sex ratio as Rome does. Not quite as bad, but still there. Now, Sparta is a little bit different in terms of how it does things. So for one, Sparta of the kind of Greek city-states is the only one that gave basic education to both men and women, right? So both boys and girls are educated in Sparta, and they're weird. Now, the Spartans are not exactly, they're a warrior culture. They're not exactly puppy dogs, but they have a weird kind of difference from other Greek societies in that as long as a child is healthy, they basically keep the child, right? If the child is deformed or sickly, right, that child might, be killed. But if the child is healthy, whether it's male or female, they keep it, they raise it, they give it a robust education. And so Sparta is, reputed for the beauty of its women in the ancient world, right? And supposedly that's where Helen of Troy and is from Sparta. If you know your Greek mythology, that reference makes sense. If you don't, then don't worry about it. But the sex ratio is closer to 50-50 in Sparta. And what you see in Sparta is women have a considerably higher status. When their brothers and husbands and fathers are away at war, women are the ones running their estates and owning their property. When they die, the women are able to inherit and run their estates and generally have a much higher status. And Guten Tag and Secord and Stark put this down to the fact that these sex ratios, are actually slightly, not quite 50-50, it's actually slightly female-centered in Sparta because a lot of men go off and die in war. So, life is better for women in Sparta and in ancient societies where women actually slightly outnumber men. So, he says, if this is correct, then Christian women in the Roman Empire should enjoy a higher status than their pagan counterparts. Okay, so what do we find? Well, we find exactly that in the Christian community, right? And again, we know this from historical records, both Christian and pagan. So, as I said last time, one of the things that Christians don't permit is infanticide, right? And this is, largely owing to Christianity's kind of Jewish heritage, right? This is something that long stood in Judaism. No infanticide, no abortion, right? So you can't kill your daughters if you have them. Supernumerary infants, right? Babies you didn't necessarily want because it's an extra mouth to feed. You still have to take care of them. A condemnation of divorce, incest, infidelity, and polygamy, all of which were rampant in the ancient world in some ways, right? Polygamy, not always, but certainly, divorce, incest, and infidelity. It was not uncommon for Roman men to divorce their wives, leaving them essentially economically destitute, to find, shall we say, someone they found more attractive. And certainly if you know your Greek and Roman myths, you see a lot of this, and it's not particularly frowned upon. In Christianity, divorce is possible at first. By the time you get to like the 4th century, it becomes essentially impossible, but it's strongly discouraged. And twice divorced men couldn't hold any official office in the church. And you still, to some extent, see this in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Catholicism essentially bans divorce, about the 4th, 5th century. Eastern Orthodoxy allows divorce, but, if you get divorced twice and try to remarry, the Orthodox Church is likely to be like, you need to go work on yourself before we'll ever grant you a divorce, because obviously there's something wrong with you and you're not, living in harmony with Christ. Males and females are expected to be chaste, right? So not to have sex outside of marriage, either before or during. So why does this matter? Like in Roman culture, women's virginity was highly prized, right? So you wanted to make sure that you were marrying a virgin bride if you were, a powerful Roman. But men were allowed to sow their wild oats, I think the expression is, right? Essentially do whatever they wanted, both before and during marriage, right? And it was sort of expected that, men would, abuse the, abuse the help, if you will, have sex with slaves, both male and female, probably have mistresses and such. Fidelity was not expected of males, and Christianity changes this, right? Males are not that it always works, but males are at least expected to be as faithful as women are and as chaste. Extramarital sex overall is condemned, and again, this is good for women in antiquity, because once you're married and with someone, right, you're not worried that you're going to be replaced. And widows aren't pressured to remarry. And this was a fairly big problem for widows in antiquity, because it essentially, the state itself would pressure you to get remarried so that your now dead husband's property could be transferred to another male, right? So there was, technically a widow could hold her husband's property, but this was seen as problematic in Roman society. So they wanted to move it into the hands of another man, so that property would then be, back in the hands of a man. And that could leave women open to a lot of abuse, being kind of forced to marry someone who's maybe just looking to increase their property. Okay, and the last one, the church supported widows, poor widows especially. So essentially in the ancient world, women have very few economic opportunities and possibilities, right? It's not like you can be, a girl boss and an independent woman in antiquity, right? You are essentially bound to your male relatives and then to your husband. And your only other real option in a lot of cases is prostitution, because there just isn't a system of kind of property ownership that favors women. And what the church does is it supports, so when your husband dies, right, this is a genuine tragedy and an enormous problem, because all of your economic power goes out the window. And you're sort of either forced into prostitution or into remarriage, or into begging on the street, right? There's not a lot of options for women. The church, however, early Christian communities, again, taking this same kind of help everybody sort of philosophy they have, supports widows, right? This is what they want to do. This is what they think is important. And so, again, joining a Christian community for women is good because if you're there, you have a good chance of being supported, even if your male, your parent, your dad, your brother, or your husband happens to die. You will still have some level of economic support and you will not be left destitute. Okay. Everything looks fine on my end. I don't know what to tell you. Everything's fine. I don't know. Did we skip over the slide well established by evidence? No, we did not. I have marks on it. It was probably just black at that time. Okay. So, what to say? Okay. Yes, the icky slide. In terms of marriage, Roman culture is kind of gross, right? So the minimum technical age of marriage for girls was about 12, right? So legally speaking, in terms of the state recognizing it, you could marry someone as young as 12, which sort of makes sense, right? That's the point at which a lot of girls, are entering puberty and could technically, bear children, but still kind of icky. Though certainly not unheard of, and right, even into the Shakespearean period, right, the Victorian period, you still have, someone commenting on Juliet, who I think is supposed to be 13. Younger girls than her are happy mothers made. So it's just a different world. But the Roman Empire was certainly no different in that, and the legal minimum was 12. However, marrying a girl younger than 12 carried no legal penalties. And basically, you could be married, and once you turn 12, you would go from not legitimate wife to legitimate wife. And even marriages to underage brides were consummated, which meant, grown men having sex with prepubescent girls in a lot of cases, which obviously is super gross. That's why I have you here. It's yucky. Okay, again, Christianity shifts this quite a bit. And what we know is that Christianity brings in relatively quickly an idea of sort of, not in the sense that you might think of it completely, but in a much greater sense, consent, right? Because essentially, Christian marriage ceremony requires women to be a consenting party, right? And if you've ever been to a Catholic wedding, the basic structure of the vows remains unchanged since the kind of early Middle Ages, right? That both parties have to be consenting, and the idea is they both have to be entering, a marriage outside of duress. So no one's forcing you to do it. So roughly speaking, if we look at the ages at which both groups are married, pagans, you can see, right, nearly half are married, before 13, and a fifth, right? So one in 5 are married under the age of 13, where it's only 7% for Christians. Again, icky, but better. Less icky. And I guess I'll just highlight the big skew is, right, the bulk of girls in the kind of Christian community are getting married here. It's what, 70, well, 7 or 80%, roughly 80%. Does that make sense? Yes, 80%. I'm bad at math. I'm sorry. 80% are getting married kind of between 15 and over the age of 18. Now, this matter. Do I have this on the next slide? No. This matters tremendously for a couple of things. And one is survival in childbirth, right? The younger you get pregnant, and there's no really super effective birth control in some ways. There is birth control, but it doesn't always work. The younger you get pregnant, in these categories, the more likely you are to suffer serious complications because you can get pregnant, as a 13, 14-year-old. You're not fully developed. You haven't gone all the way through puberty. And so, the chance of complications and death in childbirth increases exponentially. The further on you get down this line, the lower your rates of maternal mortality, right? So you're going to do better. And, you're just more mature. You're probably going to enjoy that a lot more than getting married at, say 12. Okay, now that said, obviously, what do I have next? Okay. Not everything is wonderful and glowing for women. It's still a relatively patriarchal society, and there's a fair bit of contradictory evidence, suggesting that, nobody in this room probably would have enjoyed being a woman in, Christian, in antiquity, even if you were a Christian, right? And, the status of women was not, let's just put it this way, they weren't exactly 20th or 21st century feminists. It was just better than it otherwise would have been, right? So you have certain things from, say, like Corinthians, women should stay silent in church. Oops, I don't know what I did there. Oop, come on, give me my highlighter. Women should remain silent in church. Wow, okay, we're just going to give up. Women should remain silent in church, not allowed to speak, but they should be in submission, as the law says. Right, so, higher status, but don't talk in church. If you want to know something, ask your husband when you get home. But then also, right, Paul's like, hey, here's your sister Phoebe, a deacon, right? So a kind of clerical figure of the church of Cenchrea. I think I pronounced that right. Receive her, so, in the way the Lord, receive her in the Lord in a way worthy of his people, right? And he's carrying her message, so chances are, she is the one reading this letter to the Romans because Paul has sent her. So Phoebe has a relatively high status. And we have a good sense, right, that women played a fairly prominent leadership role in the early church. However, there is still a ton of debate as to how much. And the Catholic Church has gone through a couple of kind of, in the last few years, moments where people are like, hey, and this has been a debate for a while actually, Phoebe was a deacon back in the first century. Can we have female deacons? And I think the most recent word of the Vatican is, we looked at it, but no. The Catholic Church doesn't change especially quickly. I'll just say, one of the reasons they had female deacons, people think, in the early days was when you went to get baptized in the early church, it involved you stripping naked and walking into a baptistry, which is a big kind of bath of water, where you would then be submerged, and it would have been scandalous for a man to be there with a naked woman, so they had female deacons that could perform baptisms. That's sort of the argument. Okay, this last point. Women made up a relatively high proportion of Christian martyrs, which suggests to some scholars that they held important positions, right? The Romans weren't, if the Romans, the argument here is that the Romans wanted to make examples out of people, right? They're going to pick prominent people. They're not going to, go and just grab any random person and throw them to the lions. They're going to pick your leadership or people who are prominent in your community because they want to send a message. And the fact that, a large proportion of Christian martyrs were women in the early days, people killed for their faith, suggests that they held some important positions. Okay. All right, I got a few more slides. I was hoping I was almost done. I'm like, no, so much more. We can do this. All right. So, some problems emerge, right? If 2/3, and this is where the secondary conversions come in. If 2/3 of Christians are women, this automatically creates some problems. One is, go ahead.
Could you go over a deacon?
Oh, a deacon is just like, it's a kind of a religious official. In contemporary Catholicism, it's like you can help out with certain religious services, but you're not fully a priest. So you could do things like baptism, but you can't do confessions or the full mass. So it's like you could do certain religious actions, but you can't do them all, right? So it's like, if you had like lay person, which is, just a normal person. A step up from that would be deacon. A step up from that would be priest, and then bishop, and then cardinal, and then pope. So deacon is like just one step up from a lay person. You can do a few official kind of religious actions. Sorry. Sometimes I know these things and you don't, and it's because I
You said the female deacons would.
perform baptisms primarily, right? Or we think. We don't actually know, but we think mostly they did baptisms. They probably weren't allowed to preach because, it's still a pretty patriarchal culture. But yeah, when they had to go into the baptistry and, help women disrobe, that would not have been seen as appropriate for Christian men to do. So yeah, please.
You see that in my church, they kill for them.
Yes, a martyr, yeah. A martyr is someone who's killed for their faith.
Oh.
Yeah, no problem. All right, good? Okay, so if 2/3 of women or 2/3 of Christians are women, this creates a whole bunch of problems, right? For one, only a third of them would be able to marry. Or only half of the women in your kind of religion would be able to marry. And that is a big problem in antiquity, where getting married is sort of the way that you support yourself once you are an adult woman, right? Or you go into prostitution, and probably most people don't want that. So this would have been especially a big problem for middle and upper class Roman women, and we've established, right, that Stark thinks a lot of converts would have come from the middle and upper classes. So, you can't marry down in social class when you're in Roman society, because you would lose any privilege that you had. So any inheritance, any wealth, any dowry that you might be carrying with you, you would lose if you marry, if you were a citizen and you married down in social class, or like a patrician and married down in social class, you would lose all of those privileges. And people don't want to lose privileges. So this creates a big problem. You have a lot of Christian women and not a lot of Christian men. So this means, Stark suggests, and says we have ample evidence to suggest, that they must have married, or the oversupply of women wouldn't have been useful for the growth of Christianity. It actually would have been a detriment. So what this means, and you still find this, again, if you look in Catholicism. And Catholicism is a good guide here because it essentially grows out of the early church. It's the oldest form of Christianity around. Essentially, one of the things in Catholicism is if a Catholic marries a non-Catholic and you want to go through the Catholic marriage ceremony, the couple has to agree to raise the children Catholic, right? So you have to, and this would have been the same thing in the early church, right? Christian women would have insisted on raising the children as part of the Christian community, right? So you might marry and again, women are scarce goods. So there's probably more than a few men still willing to marry them. They would have married and insisted on raising the kids as Christian. And historians, commonly find evidence of secondary conversions in the husbands of Christian women. And what tends to happen is, marry a Christian woman, convert to Christianity, and then your whole household converts to Christianity. So your children, if you have any, all of your servants and slaves all officially take the plunge and become Christian, essentially. So you have a whole bunch of secondary conversions to Christianity through women marrying into pagan households. And this is, not particularly disputed by historians. Okay, so fertility is a huge problem in the Roman Empire as well. And it's weird because fertility is becoming a huge problem in the developed world too. And I've seen a few articles now, talking about how our struggle with fertility parallels that of the Romans, which is kind of funny because I've been talking about this for a few years. So Rome struggles with fertility, right? Supernumerary infants are killed. People want small families because babies take a lot of resources. And because of the way the economy works, right, it's mostly a slave economy. So it's not like you and your family are working the land that you own. You're mostly having it done by slaves. So Rome struggles with frequent problems with fertility really from like the 1st century BCE or BC right up until like the 6th century BC or AD, sorry, 6th century AD. And there's lots of examples. And if you ever want, to make an argument, and people are like, oh, the government could just pay people to have babies. It never ever works. It didn't work for the Romans. It hasn't worked for the Russians. It's not going to work for anybody. They try things like land for babies. If you have more than 3 babies, you get a chunk of land somewhere in the empire. Land was valuable, right? And people kind of go for it at first, and they're like, yeah, but I want to have more babies. So that fails. And this is a problem, for an empire that's constantly at war and wants to expand infinitely. So what the Romans end up having to do is importing population from different non-Roman people. And this becomes such a serious problem because eventually those, especially the Germanic tribes from, up in here, from Germania, end up coming in and learning Roman military tactics. And then, they take over chunks of the Roman Empire. They sack Alexandria, the Goths do, or was it the Visigoths? I don't remember. But they just end up wreaking havoc in the kind of depopulated Roman Empire. And it leads, I think most historians would agree, in large part to the collapse of the western part of the Roman Empire in about, like all of this stuff. Well, I guess not North Africa. That stays as part of the Byzantine Empire in 476. Okay. So, what does Stark think are the sources of low pagan fertility? Okay. Marriage is held in relatively low esteem, right? They don't see marriage as particularly important, and again, Christians do. Men didn't have to get married to have sex. So, there's less emphasis on marriage because, in order to, shall we say, scratch that itch, you don't have to be married to do so. Again, different for Jews and Christians. Infanticide, widely permitted, actually seen as, in some cases, a moral duty. Mostly female infants, though males were not spared either. But basically, any supernumerary infants, infants you didn't want, it was perfect. It wasn't illegal. It was perfectly licit to kill your children. And as I said, abortion techniques, lots of them, and the decisions made by men killed a lot of children. And there's all sorts of problems here, right? Like fetal material not being expelled and women dying of infections, poisoning themselves, crude tools and secondary infections, all sorts of problems, and yet people still did it. And it kills lots of women, leads to infection and all sorts of problems. And, they had crude but somewhat effective methods of birth control. Things like ointment, honey pads. If you lived in Egypt, stuffing crocodile dung where the sun don't shine apparently was amongst them. Yeah, I know it's gross, but they thought this worked. Was seen as an effective tool. Withdrawal and playing the boy, or what you would probably call anal. Anal sex, right? All methods of not having a baby. And of course, there's just too few women. So when you have a decline in the number of women, you tend to have declines in fertility. And if you want to see a contemporary example of that, take a look at China. China's one-child policy and boy preference led in large part to the abortion of a lot of, because they had ultrasound machines, of female fetuses. And this has led to, the suggestion that by 2060, the population of China is going to decline from just over 1 billion today to about 600 million, which is a big problem for China. So, right, having too few women causes big problems in terms of fertility. And, as Stark suggests, the kind of skewed ratio in China is not nearly as bad as it was in the Roman Empire. Okay, so what do we know about Christian women? High Christian fertility is taken as a fact by the ancients, right? That Christians and Jews had lots of children. It's a sanctified marriage bond, right? A way of controlling and legitimizing sexual desire, which again leads women to greater security for children as well that are born into these relationships. So, a different kind of social structure. No abortions or infanticide were allowed. And again, going back to Judaism, most methods of birth control were not permitted, and you had lots and lots of women in Christian community, which meant high fertility, right? And that means, as time goes on, that percentage of the population is going to go up, because when one group has a fertility rate, we don't know exactly, but you could probably suspect the Romans had a fertility rate somewhere in the range of, probably 1.8, 1.9 children per woman, and the Christians were probably somewhere more like 5 children per woman, right? So that's going to skew your population statistics really quickly. Okay. Okay, we definitely need that extra day. So, I'll talk really quickly about a couple of things, and then we'll finish on Monday, and the exam will be on Wednesday. I'm sorry for bumping things. And again, if you can't write the exam on Wednesday for some reason, just send me a message. We'll arrange something alternate for you. Whether, if you can't write on Wednesday, you need to write on a different day. We'll arrange alternate things because I screwed up by going too slow, and I got the dates mixed up in my head, so I thought I had an extra day. So we'll fix it for you if it's a problem, and I'll send out a message to that regard. Okay, I'm going to say this. I'm going to use my 3 minutes. So, Stark wants to make an argument as to why he thinks the Jews were important in early Christianity. Okay, so it's been generally assumed, right, that because Judaism continues to exist in the Roman Empire and until the present, that basically Christians weren't able to convert lots of Jews. The Jews revolt against the Romans in, between 66 and 73. The Romans destroy them, sack Jerusalem, destroy the temple, and this is a painting of the destruction of Jerusalem, and scatter the Jews, across the empire. The Jerusalem church disappears, and they rename Judea to Syria, Palestina, right? To be like, screw you, Jews. We're taking your land and we're renaming it, and we're naming it according to the name of your enemies, the Phoenicians, right? So we're going to call this Syria of the Phoenicians, this land, that used to be called Judea. So they rename the land. Okay, now around the Roman Empire, though, there are lots of Jews that had, through different periods in history, moved to different parts of the Roman Empire, right? So they left like kind of this area, which is Judea and Samaria, and they moved mostly into here, Asia Minor, but even into places like Rome and across the Mediterranean. So there are Jewish communities all over the place, right? Even into Alexandria in Egypt, which is one of the major centers. So, and Stark contends that these communities were probably a source of Christian converts well into the 4th century. Okay, 1 minute. So, one of the things with the Jews, and you may notice this even today, historically they have thought of themselves, and they have been, a people kind of set apart from the rest of the world by all of the rules that Orthodox Jews have to follow. A lot of these are dietary rules, but there are lots of other practices, things like the Sabbath, that cause them to have to live together. And lots of times when Jews kind of get tired of this, you have movements to kind of try and cast off a lot of these things. And you can look at 19th century Reformed Judaism as one of these. All right, I'm out of time. I've failed. Okay, we'll come back on Monday. We'll finish this. I'll talk some more about the exam. I am really sorry for the confusion in my brain, but I will send out a message here in the next hour just kind of clarifying things for everybody. And again, if you have a problem with writing on the 6th, just let me know and I'll find a day that you can write. It's super easy for me to reschedule stuff because it's an online exam. So, if you have to write it on St. Swithin's Day, that works for me too. St. Swithin's is July 11th. That might be a little late, but any day next week or even into reading week, I can make that work. So, my error. Hello.
I can talk about for my accommodation a little bit. Last test, I didn't end up getting one. Like even, but my time wasn't any longer. But it ended up just
Should have been. I swear I put it in.
should I
Give me half a second, because I will.
it ended up being like whatever anyway, and it's really too bad. If I could get it this time.
Okay. Just. Because I swear to God, I had this in there for you.
Oh, yeah.
And I know I went through and did it. I just have to. This new system's a little kooky for how I do it.